From David Swanson.
Let's talk to each other. Let's talk to each other. It's good to have the background noise of people exercising the First Amendment while it lasts, and you can imagine their comments have some intelligence if you don't pay too much attention to them. So put them in the background. I want to get down to the point here. There are those in Congress who want our Congress to keep shelling out our grandchildren's money to pay for the occupation of Iraq. And there are those who think Congress should pass a bill opposing the occupation. And they are both wrong. Any decent bill on any issue, much less this one, will be vetoed. The way to stop funding the occupation of Iraq is for Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid to announce on Monday that they will bring no more bills to the floor to fund the occupation of Iraq. Now, some House members would try to start a discharge petition to get around Pelosi, but they would fail. Some senators would demand a war funding bill, but they would not get past a filibuster. The legal funding of the occupation of Iraq would be over. But Bush would not end the occupation. He would misappropriate funds from the Pentagon to keep it going. I almost said illegally, but it's always been illegal. In fact, Bush misappropriated funds to build bases and move troops and equipment to invade Iraq over 5 years ago. At this time, 5 years ago, weapons makers like Boeing were running double shifts for shock and awe, and our televisions were telling us that Bush was trying to achieve peace. When General Petraeus betrayed us with his testimony last month, a Congress member asked him what would he do if Congress were to cut off the funding and Bush were to order him to continue the occupation anyway. And Petraeus said he'd have to check with his lawyer. But Bush would keep it going, and Congress would have two choices. One would be to surrender and admit that the first and most powerful branch of our government as laid out in our Constitution is no longer a part of the government at all. The second option would be to make use of that portion of that Constitution that reads, "The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors." Impeachment is the one thing that the president cannot stop. He cannot veto it. He cannot signing statement it. He cannot spin it. All he can do is crawl back to Crawford with Dick Cheney to await their criminal trials. Now, you may have heard that Condoleezza Rice testified in Congress this week. You may have seen our friend Desiree Farouz holding blood-covered hands up to Condi to show her what she has done. She also testified in the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, chaired by Henry Waxman. Now, months ago, Henry Waxman subpoenaed Condoleezza Rice, and she publicly announced that she would not comply because she was not inclined to. So when Rice testified on Thursday, Waxman agreed not to ask her about topics she was not inclined to speak about. The subpoena orders Rice to testify about forged documents that were used by our president to claim that Iraq had tried to purchase uranium in Africa. Rice and Bush and Cheney and several other individuals and departments in the Bush administration have refused to comply with subpoenas, an offense for which the House Judiciary Committee passed an article of impeachment against Richard Nixon. And the subpoenas and the investigations are not even needed to prove the crimes. Far from establishing that Iraq was any threat to this nation, or apologizing for having clearly lied about it, This gang is using almost identical lies to push our nation toward a war on Iran. And again, uranium is involved. Dick Cheney's latest scheme is reportedly to push Israel to bomb a uranium enrichment plant in Iran. The White House has in fact just labeled a section of Iran's military a terrorist group. Up until this point, if the term terrorist meant anything in official U.S. discourse, it meant a non-state group that engages in violence. Now, it means any state or non-state group that engages in violence that is not supported by George W. Bush or Richard B. Cheney. At other times, though, the word terrorist appears to include anyone without white skin who immigrates to the land of the Statue of Liberty. Congressman David Davis, who I believe represents this district, has introduced a total of 2 bills, count them, in Congress. One of them would take the important step of establishing a National Bald Eagle Day. The other one would train state and local police officers in how to protect us from immigrants and/or terrorists. Now tell me if I'm right. I get the impression that the people of Tennessee are not as ignorant or xenophobic as the Honorable Congressman David Davis. Davis may have just been in Washington too long. A week is about too long for most people. The Senate right now is trying to decide whether to make our next top law enforcement official a man who refuses to say whether waterboarding is torture. Former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, thinks that's something to joke about, just as Donald Rumsfeld did. But as of late Thursday, Rumsfeld now faces 5 lawsuits charging him with torture, and the list of nations he cannot safely enter continues to grow. Meanwhile, the White House has finally announced a response to global warming. It brings health benefits. Of course, it also does not exist. And Fox News blames the California fires on Al-Qaeda. But none of these absurdities, none of these rival what was uttered this week by the chair of the Democratic caucus, Rahm Emanuel, who said that what we voted for last year was not an end to the war, but legislative action on lots of issues. And the reason only 11% of us now support what Congress is doing, Emanuel said, has nothing to do with the Democrats' refusal to stop funding the occupation. Rather, he said, we ignorant citizens have too many demands and we're too impatient. You goddamn right we're impatient. This is the same Rahm Emanuel who in January told the Washington Post that the Democrats would keep the war going until November 2008. That is 2 years of killing and dying, to be followed almost certainly by 4 more years of killing and dying. If we are going to end the occupation of Iraq, we are going to do it in the next several months. One way you can do this is by pressuring Congress members, but there are other ways as well. We can tell potential military recruits what war looks like. And one thing that recruiters will never mention is depleted uranium. Last September, a group of Iraq vets against the war were arrested in the Pentagon. Arrested on a tour of the Pentagon. Their offense was having left a stack of brochures on a literature table. Brochures that explained the possible effects of depleted uranium, from which one of those veterans was almost certainly suffering. Not only are veterans opposing this occupation, but active duty troops are refusing as illegal their orders to deploy. Yes, cheer for that. And whistleblowers in the military and in Washington are speaking out. War profiteers are facing charges for corrupt practices. All of these forces help to end the occupation and discourage the next attack. Now, those of us who have never refused